Le Trésor Maudit by Gérard de Sède told the story of a little-known village in the south of France, the now world-famous village of Rennes Le Chateau. At the end of the 19th century, so the story went, the priest of this tiny hilltop village in the foothills of the Pyrenees discovered some parchments hidden in his church. Almost overnight, it seems, his life of extreme poverty changed to one of extraordinary wealth. The discovery of the parchments had apparently led him to a lost treasure, the accursed treasure of the title. His village and the tangible evidence of how he disposed of his wealth are there for all to see. The road up to the village, the decoration of the church, his Villa Britannia and its gardens, Belvedere and Tour Magdala, were all built with his money. Henry Lincoln has discovered another mystery, a mystery that goes far beyond the supposed treasure at Rennes Le Chateau. The priest's riches are a distraction from the real secret of the village, that it is but a small part of a much greater wonder. In fact, the true mystery isn't confined to Rennes Le Chateau, but has echoes elsewhere, and is expressed in perfect form on a tiny island in the Baltic Sea. These discoveries at Rennes Le Chateau and on the Danish island of Bornholm are extraordinarily challenging, and they pose new questions about our ancient ancestors, their motivations, their skills, and their knowledge.
There I was, having read the way through the book, looking at the reproductions of two of the parchments which the priest had apparently found. And there it was, a passage from the Gospels in Latin, which talked of Jesus walking in the cornfields with the disciples, and they did rub the ears of corn and did eat. And suddenly I find myself reading off a message in French. Very simple, was hidden in a way that I've always described as a schoolboy code.
Some of the letters were slightly raised above the others. When these were picked out, the hidden message was easily readable.
It was so easy to find. And it simply said, "This treasure belongs to Dagobert II, king, and to Zion, and he is there dead."
Nowhere in the rest of the book was there any reference to this decipherment. 2 years later, in 1972, the BBC aired Lincoln's first television documentary.
And that programme, The Lost Treasure of Jerusalem, which told the story of the priest Béranger Saunière and his little village of Rennes Le Chateau, was the first that anybody outside France had ever heard of this extraordinary story.
It was back in 1972, while he was making the initial BBC film, that Lincoln received the first hint that this was something more than just a treasure story. As part of his research, he travelled to Paris to meet Gérard de Sède, author of Le Trésor Maudit.
One of the first questions I asked him was, why didn't you publish the hidden message in the parchments? And he said, "What message?" That struck me as being a very curious response, because I thought he must know it was there. And if he knew it was there, then he'd know that I knew it was there. So we fenced around this for a little while. And eventually we got to the point where we both knew that we were talking about the same message. So I repeated the question, why didn't you publish it? And he said, because we thought it might interest someone like you to find it for yourself. And that was an extraordinary response.
In the decade that followed, Lincoln made 2 more films for the BBC, The Priest, the Painter and the Devil in 1975, and The Shadow of the Templars in 1979. By the time the third film was made, the research involved had become too much for one man, So Lincoln brought in 2 others to help, Richard Lee and Michael Bagent.
And the 3 of us began to research in more depth and cover much more ground of what the story was all about. And that led eventually to the hypothesis, which we presented in a book published in 1982, and which was called The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail. And so the secret messages that the priest apparently had found began to make sense in a different context. This treasure belongs to Dagobert II, king, and to Zion, and he is there dead.
Lincoln's researches seem to suggest that the source of Béranger Saunier's wealth wasn't gold or treasure, but a secret of such significance that those protecting it would go to any lengths to safeguard its existence. All the clues, all the arcane twists and turns, the hidden codes, effaced tombstones, secret documents, paintings and statuary, the elements that sparked the imaginations of the BBC Chronicle audience through 3 films, suggested that there were people in the background who knew a great secret and were taking enormous pains to protect it. Yet at the same time, they seemed to be deliberately placing obscure hints to draw attention to its existence. There were corroborating documents, the dossier secret, documents that had come to light in the Bibliothèque Nationale, documents showing a line of Grand Masters of the Priory of Zion from the 12th century to the present day. Faked, surely. Except that when researched by Lincoln, Bagent and Lee, it was found that each of the seemingly unrelated names on that list was subtly connected in ways which would require a very deep knowledge of European history for anyone to manufacture. Nothing was ever straightforward, nothing could ever be proven, and yet a trail of tantalizing clues and convoluted pathways pointed to something being protected, something being preserved down through the ages. The need to verify the scenario hinted at by Plantard, the Bibliothèque Nationale documents, the parchments, and indeed the activities of the priest Béranger Saunier, led Lincoln, Bagent and Lee to an extended study of European history. This fresh approach unearthed new discoveries and unexpected connections. Chief amongst these was the suggestion that the Priory of Zion may have been responsible for the creation of that enigmatic order of warrior monks, the Knights Templar. And with any investigation of the Knights Templar, it's hard to avoid dealing with the popular notion of their association with the myth of the Holy Grail.
And in the early Grail stories, the Templars were referred to as the guardians of the Grail and the Grail family. No matter where they came from, unquestionably they contain messages. But having dealt with those, I continued to look at them, and there were lots of unanswered questions, even though we'd got the secret messages out of it. What we'd got were things like, why are there 3 crosses dotted amongst the text?
The obvious question was, what happens if lines are drawn to connect the crosses? Well, that question is immediately rewarded as a line from this cross to this traces out a word from the intersected text. That word is Zion. So the right questions are being asked. What next? Drawing a line to the other cross doesn't produce a significant result. Yet the clear message from the first line is that the crosses are significant. What about the small triangular design in the upper left-hand corner? The upper face of this little triangle lines up with the cross on line 4, the lower face with the bottom of the first line. The connection of these 2 crosses produces this line. Inspired by a design which was said to have been inscribed on a stone found 2 miles from Rennes Le Chateau, Lincoln played with the idea of a similar design being present in the parchment. There is no cross or mark to indicate the necessary line. But Lincoln was convinced that the creator of this parchment was playing a subtle game. He noticed that this A is oddly detached, the only isolated letter in the text, and that the exact midpoint of this line falls in that gap. The choice of this point is confirmed when a circle centred here not only naturally passes through these points on the triangle, but also passes through the cross in line 7. Choosing that point to create this line was further confirmed as correct when it's seen that the point created here is exactly equidistant from the first two crosses. The circle is indicated. And now the little design in the corner makes sense. The circle creates two more points of intersection, which when joined, produce this. In 1971, when Henry Lincoln found this hidden pentacle, the story of Rennes Le Chateau was still rooted in the mystery of a buried treasure.
It didn't mean anything to me at the time when I found it. It's important to remember that I wasn't looking for anything specific. I was merely asking myself, what is there?
The second parchment is just as important in the whole story as the first. In 1971, Lincoln's interpretation of the message in the first parchment and a foray into the history of the area surrounding Rennes Le Chateau had provided him with enough material for a short 20-minute film. Out of the blue, de Sède, who'd been in contact with Lincoln during the filming, now sent him a decipherment of this second parchment. The hidden message is in French. In English, it reads, "Shepherdess, no temptation, that Poussin Tenier hold the key, Peace 681, by the cross, and this horse of God I complete, this daemon guardian, at midday, blue apples." Utterly meaningless on the face of it. But there was one tenuous link to a part of the story that hitherto had seemed insignificant. In Le Trésor Maudit, de Sède had reported that Saunière had originally taken the parchments he found to Paris to be examined by experts. Before returning to his village, he'd visited the Louvre Museum, where he'd bought reproductions of 3 paintings: The Shepherds of Arcadia by Nicolas Poussin, one of Tenier's paintings of St. Anthony, and a portrait of Pope Celestin V. Here was a definite clue. Shepherdess, no temptation, that Poussin Tenier hold the key. Why had Saunière purchased paintings by the 2 artists mentioned in this decipherment? What was the link? At the time, it wasn't clear which painting by Tenier had been purchased by Saunière, but there is only one Shepherds of Arcadia, Les Bergers d'Arcadie, by Nicolas Poussin.
3 shepherds and a shepherdess looking at a tomb, in what I was told was a fictional landscape, an imaginary tomb in an imaginary landscape.
2 of the shepherds point out the enigmatic phrase inscribed on the tomb, Et in Arcadia ego. And with this phrase entering the tale, suddenly yet another part of the story began to make sense. This slab, now in the museum at Rennes Le Chateau, originally lay on the grave of Marie de Blanchefort, who died in 1781. It's said that Béranger Saunière himself effaced the inscription on the gravestone, but originally it read thus. It too was reproduced in de Sède's book. The 2 outer columns looked simple enough, but their meaning had so far remained obscure. They appeared to be a combination of Latin and Greek, but only now, with the inscription on the Poussin tomb scene before him, did the penny drop for Lincoln. The message is in Latin, but it's only revealed when being seen as written in the Greek alphabet. When Lincoln transliterated the Greek symbols into the Roman alphabet, the 2 columns simply read, Et in Arcadia ego. Curious enough, but also reproduced in Le Trésor Maudit was a reproduction of the inscription on the headstone of Marie de Blanchefort's grave. And it's the oddities on this carving that provide the key to the incredibly complex decipherment of the second parchment and that give us the Poussin message. Already the simple story of a priest, some parchment and a mythical treasure seemed to be taking on a new dimension and depth. But then something else happened. Something that would elevate the story of Rennes Le Chateau beyond the little 20-minute TV insert first intended. Some photographs arrived in the post, again sent by de Sède. The photographs were of a tomb nestling in a pastoral landscape. But what was stunning was that the scene seemed to be identical to the one depicted in the 17th century painting by Nicolas Poussin. De Sède also revealed that the scene in the photograph was easy to find, a mere 4 miles along the road west from Rennes Le Chateau, near a village called Arc.
It was quite an extraordinary moment to drive along the road and see it in reality. There are arguments, of course, about how old the structure is. There isn't any evidence for its age. The question of whether Poussin painted that tomb remains open. There is no question, though, that he painted the landscape. Somebody could later have built the tomb to complete the picture. Or maybe it's been there for centuries. We just don't know.
But in studying the painting, Lincoln was becoming attuned to its details, and he noticed an anomaly. In the X-ray, the underpainting beneath this shepherd's wreath is visible, and here it can be seen that the line of the tomb is painted on top of the staff. In other words, the shepherd's staff had been painted before the tomb. Lincoln thought it odd that a foreground item should be painted before its background. What was important about the staff that it should be placed first? Having had his attention drawn to the staff, he was curious to see what else could be said about it. Well, it's divided by the shepherd's arm. But more than that, it is precisely divided in two by the shepherd's arm. These two distances are exactly equal. And this is the same distance as this, and this, and this, and this. This seemed a significant discovery. The repetition of a fixed measure throughout the canvas suggested an underlying structure, where a seemingly relaxed and fluid depiction of a natural scene was in fact being dictated by rigid rules. Expert help was needed, and this was sought from Professor Christopher Cornford of the Royal College of Art, who'd made a particular study of the geometrical composition of paintings. He'd already analysed another work of Poussin's in this way, and he agreed to do the same with the Shepherds of Arcadia. The outcome of this study was startling. Startling to Cornford, because in this painting, Poussin had structured the image not only using a technique which, as expected, conformed to the presiding Renaissance philosophy, but he'd also simultaneously employed an archaic Masonic geometric system which had been known to the ancient Egyptians. This technique should not have been present in a 17th century painting, and yet here it was, a masterpiece based on an ancient and mystical form, the pentacle.
Later, when researching other aspects of the story and asking other simple questions, why was the church dedicated to Mary Magdalene, that we discovered that Mary Magdalene was regarded as the medium of a secret revelation. And she had been given as her symbol in the heavens the planet Venus. And now, curiously, we come back again to geometry, because each planet, as it revolves in the heavens, creates alignments. There's only one planet which creates a regular figure in the heavens, and that planet is Venus, the Magdalene, and the design which she draws in the heavens is again the five-pointed star. And that's when I realized there were in fact three castles associated with the story. There was the castle at Rennes Le Chateau, there was the Templar castle at Bézieux, and there was also the castle built by Bertrand de Blanchefort, who was fourth Grand Master of the Knights Templar. So I looked at the three castles on the map, and each one was on a natural mountain peak. There they were, clearly marked on the map. And when I drew the triangle and measured the angles, I found that in fact I was looking at what one could call a pentagonal triangle. It was exactly that triangle with angles of 36 degrees and 72 degrees that made up a pentagon. The obvious next step was to look for the other 2 points of the pentagon, and then to find that they were already marked on the map, not with castles, this time with spot heights marked on the map. What I had was 5 natural mountain peaks in perfect pentagonal geometry. Now that was extraordinary.
The parchments, the painting of the tomb near Rennes Le Chateau, the occult relationship of the Magdalene to the planet Venus, and now a perfect pentacle described by the landscape itself. As already mentioned, one of the main source documents that supposedly helped to establish the credentials of the Priory of Zion was the Dossier Secret, an assortment of papers deposited in the Bibliothèque Nationale during the late 1950s. Many other obscure pamphlets and papers relating to the Rennes Le Chateau story were deposited around the same time, and among these was a small booklet called Le Serpent Rouge. Following a line of clues he detected in the text of this work, David Wood examined the sunrise line as seen from Rennes Le Chateau on the 22nd of July, feast day of Mary Magdalene. It was said that on that day the sun is seen to rise directly over Blanchefort. When he drew this line on the map, Wood found that it passed precisely through the church in the village of Arques. A line in Le Serpent Rouge reads, "On his white rock, looking beyond the black rock towards the south." Blanchefort means white fort, and on the same mountain, towards the south, is Rocanegre, black rock. Extending a line from Blanchefort to Rocanegre, Wood found it struck the church at Rennes-les-Bains precisely. What's more, this line sits at an exact 90 degrees to the sunrise line. Another line in the Serpent Rouge reads, "Find the line of the meridian in going from east to west." The Paris meridian, which was only replaced by the Greenwich meridian in 1884, passes Wood's sunrise line between Blanchefort and Arques. The angle between these two lines is 72 degrees, the base angle of a pentagram. Again following clues in the booklet, Wood measured the distance between Arques and Rennes Le Chateau and divided it into 6. The second division from Arques along the sunrise line fell exactly on the Paris meridian, and he saw that the distance from Rocanegre to Rennes-les-Bains was identical to one of these divisions. The Poussin tomb is here. Knowing the importance in the story of the tomb, Wood looked for a possible connection with the structure that was emerging. He drew a line from the tomb through the intersection of the meridian and the sunrise line and discovered that it too hit Rennes-les-Bains Church. Wood's next move may have been a lucky guess, but seeing that the church at Rennes-les-Bains was significant to the design, he sought a reiteration of the distance to Rocanegre along this latest line and marked it off. His trained eye then spotted something extraordinary. To confirm what he seemed to be seeing, he traced a circle round this point using the distance to Rennes Le Chateau as the radius measure. This circumference exactly marks off the castle of Custosa, Serres Castle, the point of intersection of the Paris Meridian and the Sunrise Line, Les Toustoun, the prominent outcrop that can be seen in Poussin's painting, the church at Bougarache, and the church of Saint-Just-le-Bézout. But Wood was on the hunt for a pentacle. Marking off the essential 36-degree angles within the circle produced this, an astounding discovery. For David Wood, this was the start of a line of inquiry that would eventually result in the publication of his own book, Genesis, in 1985. Rennes Le Chateau is in the Languedoc, a region of France which is both overwhelmingly beautiful and blessed with many traces of its rich and turbulent past. It was here that the Cathar heresy took root, flourished, and was viciously suppressed by the Roman Church. In these mountains, the Knights Templar, proud warrior monks, established castles and commanderies. An historically real and ancient organization that at one time had money, power, influence, and, it said, sacred knowledge. "1,000 miles away on Bornholm, Erling Hoggensen was detecting their presence too. Historically, round churches have always been associated with the Knights Templar. And in the 12th century, at the time they were built, Denmark's links with the order were surprisingly strong. The Danish Archbishop of Lund between 1137 and 1177 was Eskil.
He was a good friend of Bernhard of Clairvaux, who was the protector for the Templars. And the grand chapter of the Templars were in Clairvaux at the time where Eskil were down there for 7 years. He was actually down there in many occasions. And he spent 7 years down there at a time where we can see from historical records that they actually made plans for the Crusades in Baltic. And Templars, of course, and Crusades, they are closely connected. In particular, when we talk about supply for a fleet, which was this crusade had to do with conquering the Baltic countries there, the Estland, Letland and Lithuania. And Denmark was in charge of that, or became in charge of that after this meeting in Clairvaux together with Eskil and the Pope Alexander III. So we can see there is a very, very close connection to that area, which actually is the heart of the Templars at the time. Yeah, well, when I first had the thought that there could be a Templar link between Bornholm and this knowledge, I thought about that if the Templar were involved and had done these churches and had then connected that with geometry, it was not unlikely that they could have done something like that somewhere else. And then I remembered the television program that Henry made and thought that there might be a good possibility that they have done it down there in the area of Rennes Le Chateau. And I thought I would contact Henry Lincoln and tell him that. So I contacted him, I called his agent, and eventually the agent had talked to Henry, and we talked then over the phone, and I said to him, I think if you look down there at the churches, you might find that they are connected in a geometrical pattern. And there was a pause, And then he said, "Did you read my book?" And I said, "Yes," because at that time I had with great interest read the Holy Blood, Holy Grail, and I thought that was what he meant. But then it turned out he didn't mean that one. He meant another one that he has just recently published, a book that was at that week going to be published in France, called The Holy Place.
It was the Knights Templar that seemed to tie together the geometry of Rennes Le Chateau and the geometry of Bornholm. The two lines of research were drawn into one when Lincoln and Haagensen began to work together. Their collaboration produced a series for television in 1992, which was broadcast as The Secret of the Templars, and in 2000 their book, The Templars' Secret Island, was published. The authors explored the idea that the Knights Templar had been protecting a secret knowledge obtained in the Holy Land, and that for some reason in the 12th century they sought to express or preserve that knowledge in the landscape of Bornholm and Rennes Le Chateau. Lincoln and Haagensen were also able to demonstrate the exquisite detail of the geometry on Bornholm and show not only the incredible accuracy of the positioning of the churches, but also that the geometry itself is both elegant and purposeful. Incredibly, the Bornholm geometry contains solutions to ancient mathematical problems. An amazingly accurate method for calculation of circumference without using pi, the trisection of the angle, a mathematical problem that's exercised the greatest of minds for centuries, solved with incredible accuracy on the island of Bornholm. The Bornholm geometry contains a great five-pointed star. Curiously, the eastern tip of this star doesn't fall on the church of Bodilsker, as it should in theory, but on the adjoining tower, precisely on this enigmatic and otherwise inexplicable stone on the southeastern face.
And then, of course, you could wonder if it was at all possible at those times to make anything like that, anything that accurate. And the answer is that it very well might have been, because we can see that exactly down in that area of Clairvaux, and contemporary with Bernard of Clairvaux, there is a mathematician who gives lecture to his students, and his notes have survived, and we can see how he explains how one do this kind of measurement. It's very fascinating to see that our forefathers had capabilities that we maybe normally don't think they had. I mean, when you talk to people in general, they will tend to say that in the medieval time, people believed the earth was flat. Now, if you read these lectures that Hugo Victor was giving, you can see that they have a much more advanced knowledge. He described the sphere of the Earth very clearly to his pupils, and also describes how it's possible to measure it and all that. And from that, he takes actually basic in a measurement done that much longer back from his time than he is from our time. So you can see that this knowledge goes far back in time.
The geometry alone indicates the sophistication of the 12th century architects, but the churches hint at even more concealed purpose and design. The conical roofs are a relatively recent addition. Originally, the four round churches would have looked like this, with tiered ramparts. The generally accepted interpretation of their design is that they are defensive structures. But if the churches did have a defensive function, then their positions in the landscape were poorly chosen. These openings, sometimes described as arrow slits, are impractical. They'd be useless for that purpose in the event of an attack. So what could their true purpose be? Well, it can be shown that the slits and holes in the inner and outer rotundas of Oosterlaas at least are designed to observe the rising and setting of the sun at the summer and winter solstices. All the round churches have this inner and outer rotunda, and alignment of two gaps in the wall at this distance apart provides a very accurate way of defining particular points on the horizon. The evidence suggests that the churches of Bornholm could be a network of calendrical observatories joined together by a precise geometry that is in turn locked into the curvature and division of the surface of the Earth.